I basically learn whatever I need to learn to accomplish an objective. I think actually most people could do this, but they often self-limit. People are capable of more than they think. I mean, what I've found is if you simply read a lot of books and talk to people, you can learn almost anything. When you're building something new, there's going to be mistakes.
Yeah.
And it's important to recognize those mistakes, acknowledge them, and take corrective action. And the success of a company is very much more about how quick are you to fix the mistakes, not will you make mistakes. If you see the difference between a startup that is successful and one that is not, and it's because the successful one, they both made mistakes, but the successful one recognized the mistakes, fixed them very quickly, and the unsuccessful one tries to deny that the mistakes exist. I learned it when I was studying physics. In physics, you're taught to always question yourself. You're taught to always assume that you're wrong, not assume that you're right, and you have to prove yourself not wrong. And so I think that physics framework is really where I learned it, and it's very effective for learning counterintuitive things that aren't obvious. I mean, it's not like I like failure. I mean, who likes failure? It's terrible. But if you only do things that are certain to succeed, then you're only going to be doing very obvious things. You know, a lot of life in general, in any job, there's like you have to do your chores. You know, I think to be successful at almost anything, you have to do the tough stuff and as well as the enjoyable stuff. You have to do the boring stuff as well as the non-boring stuff. And if you don't do your chores, then bad things will happen. But if they don't do the things that they don't like to do, then the company will be in trouble. Like you have to, you basically, like it's more fun to cook the meal than to clean the dishes. But you need to clean the dishes. People take too many things they assume too many things to be true without a sufficient basis in that belief. It's very important that people closely analyze what is supposed to be true and try to build up, try to say let's analyze things from first principles, not by analogy or not by convention. If you assume things are true by convention, which is actually what most people do, then it's difficult to gain insight into how things can be bettered. So, you know, in any argument or any sort of train of thinking, you want to make sure that the underlying premises are valid and applicable, and then in reaching a conclusion, that the conclusion you're reaching is necessarily driven by the underlying premises and the interconnection between those premises. That may seem like a really simple thing to say, but most people don't do that. So it's really the foundation of rational thought. Well, I think it's helpful to have kind of a physics framework for looking at things. Do a first principles analysis, look for negative feedback, and really believe in what you're doing, but not just from a blind faith standpoint. Like to have really thought about it and say, okay, this is true. I'm convinced it's true, and I've tried every angle to figure out if it's untrue, and sort negative feedback to figure out maybe if I'm wrong. But then after all that, it still seems like this is the right way to go. Then that I think gives one a fundamental conviction and an ability to convey that conviction to others, and to convince them to join. And that's what a company is. It's a group of people who come together to create a product of some kind. And so if you can convey that and answer the concerns that people have, convince them that this is something that needs to be done, it's important, and here is a path to do it, even if that path has a lot of danger associated with it and risk, and maybe it won't succeed. But people can understand, okay, this is why it's important, and even if the odds are that it won't succeed, it's worth trying to do it. Then I think you can create a great company. Well, I think certainly you need to be very driven and have a high pain threshold. Yeah, I mean, it's really hard starting a company. I mean, you have to basically be prepared to work constantly, from when you wake up to when you go to sleep. You have to be willing to deal with a lot of difficult problems and thorny problems. You have to be willing to deal with an enormous amount of stress. And you just got to push yourself super, super hard. I wouldn't recommend it for most people. First of all, I really need to give some thought to like, how can I provide advice that would be most helpful? And I'm not sure I've given enough thought to that to give you the best possible answer. But I think certainly being focused on something that you're confident will have high value to someone else, and just being really rigorous in making that assessment, because people tend to, a natural human tendency is wishful thinking. So a challenge for entrepreneurs is to say, well, what's the difference between really believing in your ideals and sticking to them versus pursuing some unrealistic dream that doesn't actually have merit? And that is a really difficult thing to tell you. Can you tell the difference between those two things? So you need to be sort of very rigorous in your self-analysis. I think certainly extremely tenacious. So when you create a company, I mean, if you think, well, what is a company really? A company is a group of people gathered together to create a product or service, and that's really all a company is. And so you have to really believe in what you're creating, and that it's and know in your heart and mind that this is something that matters, that and that the world ought to have. And I think it's important to investors to show that you're all in. And I think, for example, with Tesla, the fact that I invested all the money I had, literally I had to borrow money from friends to pay the rent in 2008. The fact that I was all in, I think, made a huge difference to the investors, to convince them to invest in Tesla at the same time that say GM and Chrysler were going bankrupt. Yeah, I did that at both SpaceX and Tesla. I think that's really fundamental. And then when you hire people, or really what you're trying to do when you hire people, that just means you're convincing people to join you in the endeavor. You should hire people that are also passionate about what you're doing. So it's not just that they're not just there for the salary. They really need to care about what they're doing, and then they will stay during the dark times. I think you could either work at a company in those arenas, or say, okay, what's some important piece of the puzzle in rockets or cars or something, and then put together a group of people and figure out how to make that piece of the puzzle super good. And that's like that's the way to do it. Starting a company is a very tough thing. You should certainly expect that it is going to be very hard. It's going to be harder than getting a job somewhere by a pretty good margin. And the odds of you losing the money that you've invested or your friends have invested is pretty high. I mean, those are just the basic facts. If you don't mind things being really hard and high risk, then starting a company is a good idea. Otherwise, it's probably unwise, and will certainly stress you out. So I think you have to be pretty driven to make it happen. Otherwise, you will just make yourself miserable. And then in creating a company, say how do you make the best product or service possible? Companies that don't make good products or services just shouldn't exist. I think that's just pretty logical. So I actually just don't care about motivation. I just give it everything I've got, irrespective of what the circumstances may be. You just keep going and get it done. I think my life would be very unbalanced by most people's definition, since I work quite a lot, and I probably put in sort of between 80 and 100 hours a week of work, which is a lot, and then most of my remaining waking hours are spent with my kids. So that's my life. Probably I have a really high intrinsic drive. Yeah, I can just get really sort of set on something, and then I just kind of am able to keep going in that direction. Certainly I'd invite you to apply for a job at SolarCity or Tesla or SpaceX. And if not, then if that doesn't work for whatever reason, then I guess apply to jobs at other companies in that arena, or try starting a company. Although I have to say that in the space business is quite hard to start a company in the space business because it's such a capital-intensive business. So it may be better to do something in solar power, or if you're going to do it in cars, do it as kind of a component supplier for cars or something like that.